The tomato seeds I'll be starting here today are, of course, Cherokee Purple. They are my favorite tomatoes to grow. I'm also going to be growing the 4th of July hybrid tomatoes, which is one of my favorites as well. And I'm actually growing the Mortgage Lifter again this year because I grew it last year and it was such a big producer that I really wanted to grow it again. And as you can see, I already filled one of my trays here. And what I like to do before I put my seeds in the tray is I like to water them down a little bit and make the mix a little bit moist before I put the seeds in. And now I am ready to put my Cherokee Purple seeds in. I've already labeled one of the markers here, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Alright, so all I'm going to do is just add 1 or 2 Cherokee Purple seeds per cell. And now all I'm going to do is go back and gently push the seeds down into the seeding mix, just like that. Just enough to cover the seeds. And I have at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cells of Cherokee Purple, so that should get me about 30 plants altogether. And some of these I may be giving away, or I might even sell a few of them, who knows. Alright, so I went ahead and I put the rest of the seeds in the tray, and as you can see, I got my Cherokee Purples there, the Mortgage Lifters there, and the 4th of July's there. And as you know, I've said it before, the Cherokee Purples are one of my favorites. And also, the Mortgage Lifter is a very prolific heirloom tomato. And I grew it last year and it did phenomenally well for me. I probably got more tomatoes off of that than I did anything else. And, well, with the exception of the 4th of July tomato. The 4th of July tomato is one of my favorite hybrids. And I've been growing that every year for the past 4 years or more, and it produces small 4-ounce tomatoes, and they are very prolific. The tomatoes that I planted 2 weeks ago are getting pretty tall now, and of course I have the Cherokee Purple there. I have the Mortgage Lifters and the 4th of July tomatoes, and they're all coming along really well. And probably about next week, give it another week, I'll probably put them into bigger pots. So that might happen maybe next week sometime. But as you can see, they're all doing very well for me. Okay, so here's my tomato plants. I started them about 3 weeks ago, and it's been, I think, about 2 weeks since they germinated, and they grow very quickly here in the greenhouse. And over the past week, I've actually been running a heater in the greenhouse, and that's helped them grow a lot quicker. It's actually been pretty cool here at night. It's been in the mid-40s the past couple nights, and when it gets that cool in the greenhouse, it can slow the tomato plants down. But as you can see, they are doing very well, but they've just about outgrown the seed trays here, so I'm going to transplant them to some 6-inch pots that I have here. Today I'm just transplanting the Cherokee Purple. That's probably about all I have time for this evening, but this year I plan on growing more Cherokee Purple in my garden than I did last year. Okay, so as you can see, I've already loaded up all my pots with Miracle Grow potting soil, and basically all I do when I transplant my tomatoes to larger pots is we'll come over here, I make a small hole right down the middle of the potting soil like that, and then all I do is come over here, I take one of the Cherokee Purples and I take the plug and I put it down as deep as I can inside the pot, just like that. And the whole idea of transplanting your tomato plants to larger pots is that the deeper you plant them, the bigger your root system. So when I actually remove these from these 6-inch pots, I'll probably plant them even deeper yet. But the idea is to get a really good root system by transplanting them from the seed tray to the pots and then to the garden. So the deeper you plant them, the bigger the root system, because all these little hairs on the bottom of these tomato plants here will all sprout roots. So the bigger your root system, the healthier your plant will be. And now that I've already transplanted all of them to the larger pots, I'm going to go ahead and give them a small dose of Job's fertilizer, and that's what I got right here in this bag. And I just take about a teaspoon of it and just sprinkle it around the plant just like that. And I'm going to put 1 scoop in each pot. And I do realize that the potting soil itself does have some fertilizer in it. I just like to give the transplants a bit more of a boost by using the Job's fertilizer. These are my Cherokee Purples. Get them all lined up here, and they're all doing very well. Look like they're looking nice and green there. And I've also went ahead and planted some mortgage lifters in pots as well. And you can see some of the leaves on these are looking a little yellow because I left them in the seed tray too long. But because they're in the pots now, they'll get some more fertilizer and they'll perk up real good. And they'll probably be nice and green. And they'll probably be double in size by next week. And so they're looking okay at the moment, but they'll definitely look better by next week. Of course, I haven't shown any video of the tomatoes for the last week and a half, and they have actually grown to about 1.5 times the size that they were about a week and a half ago. And you can see they're a good 12 inches tall. Some of them maybe more than that. So they're all just about ready to put in the ground. The Cherokee Purple plants have gotten pretty tall now. A lot of these that you see here are anywhere between 12 and 16 inches tall, and that means they're definitely ready to put in the ground. I probably could have put them in last week if I really wanted to, but just didn't have time. But as you can see, I got about 8 of them lined up here, and I'm getting ready to put them in my raised beds. And I'm going to plant them 1 per square foot in front of these trellises, and I'm going to plant them 4 in front of each trellis. So here we go. And so when I plant my Cherokee Purples, I want to make sure I plant them about 12 inches deep into my raised beds, because that's how big my raised beds are, about 12 inches. And I'm going to place that tomato plant all the way at the bottom of the hole there. But before I do that, I usually add a couple handfuls of Job's fertilizer in the bottom of the hole. And I also put about a tablespoon of Epsom salts in the hole as well. So that's about 1 tablespoon there. And let's go ahead. We'll get this tomato plant in the hole there. Well, let me mix this up here a little bit in the bottom. And then I just pull the tomato plant out of the pot, sit it right down into the bottom of the hole as deep as I can. Roughly about 12 inches, just like that. And then cover it up. And we're good to go. And now I'm going to go down along and plant the rest of these right in front of the trellis there. And then I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. There you go. I have all the Cherokee Purples planted in this raised bed. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them all lined up in front of the trellis here, all about 1 foot apart. And this is actually the most I've actually grown at one time. For the Cherokee Purples, I usually only grow 4 plants, but because it's one of my favorites this year, I decided to grow 8 instead of 4. And then also, as you can see on the back side there, I got my mortgage lifters ready, and I'm going to put them on the other side of the trellis probably tomorrow evening. And so there you have it. That's how I put my Cherokee purples in the ground there, or in the raised beds. There are quite a few large flowers on these plants here, so they are doing quite well. And we'll walk up here a little bit closer, and you can see there's some large clusters of flowers here. But if you look over here on this first plant, you can see there's a very, very large flower there growing. And that's a cluster of about 3 or 4 tomato flowers together. And that is what I was talking about. That is a mega bloom. A mega bloom is basically a cluster of tomato flowers together that will form a very, very large tomato. So I'm hoping this one turns out to be really big. And if it does, could be one of the biggest ones I've grown so far since I've been growing tomatoes. And that's also not the only mega bloom I have growing right now. On just about every plant I have at least one large mega bloom. And as you can see, there's one right here, although it's hard to see, it's kind of bent over. And Cherokee purples do have some unusual growth patterns with them, in that sometimes on the main stem you will get a very large cluster of tomatoes that almost will stunt the growth of the tomato plant and keep it from growing. So the mortgage lifters here on the back side also do have a few mega blooms, but they are not quite as big as the Cherokee purples. I often get very large ones on these Cherokee purples, but we'll move around here. We'll look at the mortgage lifters as well. You can see here's quite a large flower there, and then a few of them right here as well. But for the most part, the mortgage lifters don't have very many mega blooms on them. Nowhere near as much as the Cherokee purples. And as a matter of fact, I really have only seen the really large mega blooms on the Cherokee purples. There hasn't been too many other plants that I've seen them on. I have seen maybe a few on some hybrid plants, but most of the time the mega blooms seem to be on the heirloom tomatoes. Not very many I have seen on the hybrids. And but also, as you can see, the mortgage lifters are still doing quite well. Nowhere near the amount of clusters of tomatoes that I have on the Cherokee purples there. We have some clusters of tomatoes, but nothing quite as large as those. Got a lot of large tomatoes on there, so I can't wait to pick some of those. And this is from one of the large mega blooms that I had. And hopefully that one turns out to be a really big one. Hopefully maybe a 2-pounder. I don't know, we'll see. I have a few other large ones on down here as well. See if we can move some of these out of the way. There's another really large one right there. Another large one there. That came from one of the mega blooms. So can't wait to see how big some of these get. And as you can see, they're more than halfway up the trellis, probably another 2 feet, and they'll be to about the top of this trellis here. And I think this trellis is about 6.5 feet. I haven't measured it, but it's pretty close. And moving on around here to the mortgage lifters, and they're doing very well also. They're moving right along just like the Cherokee purples are. Got quite a few clusters of tomatoes on there. There's a large cluster of tomatoes there, one here, some more in here, and got even more forming up on the tops of the tomato plants too. Even more blooms coming out. So no disease problems right now. I have no pest issues, no aphids or anything like that. So far this year, but the tomatoes are doing very, very well for me. So today I wanted to talk about the different types of tomatoes and pruning them. And as you know, I've been growing Cherokee Purple tomatoes, and Cherokee Purples are indeterminate type tomatoes. And indeterminate type tomatoes are tomatoes that will grow all the way to the end of the season till they are killed by frost, disease, or pests. And when you're growing indeterminate tomatoes, you often have to do a lot of pruning to keep them under control. And as you can see here, I've done a lot of pruning on these Cherokee Purples here, and right there you can see a spot where I pruned. That's where one of the suckers came out. And that's one of the things you want to do when you're growing these, especially when you're growing them 1 per square foot, is to prune all the suckers that are coming off the plants. And the indeterminate types are vining tomatoes, so they will just keep growing out of control unless you do prune them. So when you're pruning and you're growing 1 per square foot, you want to keep your plants to 1 stem, just like I have here. And then whenever you see a sucker pop out of the elbow of one of the plants, like right here, you just snip it off, just like that. And that's how I keep my Cherokee Purples under control. I keep them all to 1 stem until they get all the way to the top of the trellis, and then I'll top them off once they get all the way to the top of the trellis. Also, when you're growing tomatoes like I grow them here, you also want to prune the bottom 1 to 2 feet off your tomato plants. And the main reason for that is to keep the soil from splashing onto the leaves and causing fungal diseases or bacteria diseases. And you can see right here that I've pruned at least 1 to 2 feet off the bottom of almost all my plants. And right now you can see there is no sign of disease. And we did have a few thunderstorms here the past couple days, which splashed a lot of water up onto the leaves because it rained so hard. And as you can see, there's not a lot of debris or dirt on the leaves, so you can tell that pruning the first 1 to 2 feet of the plant does help keep a lot of that soil off of the leaves. I'd just like to say the mortgage lifters, I believe, are going to outperform the Cherokee Purples. They are known to be very, very prolific. Look at that large cluster of tomatoes there, and a large cluster there. And one thing I'd like to take note of is, look at it. It's all the way over the top of the trellis. These things are doing fabulous. I've never seen any of my tomato plants grow this fast to the top of the trellis, but these are all the way to the top and over. As well as they are doing now, I would say they'd probably be up to 10 feet by the end of the season. But obviously my trellis don't go that high, so I will probably be trimming some of them off. So very, very impressive mortgage lifter tomatoes here going on. I'd say it's probably the most prolific beefsteak tomato plant that I've grown. So as y'all know, my tomatoes have been doing really good so far, and I haven't had a lot of problems or any kind of disease or pest with it, but I do have some deficiencies in the soil, and I'll show you what that looks like here. And if you take a look at the leaves here on the bottom of the plants, and you can see it's nowhere else That's all on the bottom. And it's also on the mortgage lifters over here on the other side. You can see the color out of the leaves are going. They're turning yellow in the middle there. And the fact that they are on the lower leaves tells me that this is actually a magnesium deficiency. And tomatoes are a very heavy feeder, and they will just suck all the nutrients out of the soil very, very quickly. And as you can see, some of these plants are just loaded with tomatoes, and so that's what's happening here. It's sucking all the nutrients out of the soil, and on the older leaves you're seeing a magnesium deficiency show up. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to fertilize the tomatoes again. It's been probably about 6 weeks since I put the tomatoes in the ground, and that means it's time to fertilize them with some more Job's fertilizer. So let's walk back around here. I got my bag of fertilizer over here. This is the Job's fertilizer, and all I'm really going to do is just take a handful or two and just spread it around the bottom of the plant like that. Now, Job's fertilizer has a lot of different micronutrients in it, so it'll do very well at fixing the deficiencies in the plants. I may even hit these plants with some Epsom salts, because Epsom salts does have magnesium in it. As a matter of fact, that's what it is. It's magnesium sulfate. And maybe I'll hit that. Maybe I'll hit the plants with some Epsom salts later in the week. But for right now, I'm just going to go ahead and finish fertilizing some of these tomato plants here. So as you can see, I got quite a few Cherokee Purples here that are not far from being ready to pick. A lot of times I do pick my tomatoes early. I pick them at first blush, and that is basically because I have a lot of squirrels in my yard, and sometimes they will take a chunk out of the tomatoes when the weather is really, really hot. Generally they bother my corn more than anything else, but as you can see, we do have one quite large Cherokee Purple there. I also had a really, really large tomato right here, and as you can see, it's missing. Why is it missing? Because I just picked it a few minutes ago, and I weighed it, and it is humongous. It's a very, very large tomato, and as it turns out, it is one of the Mortgage Lifter tomatoes that I've been growing. And I thought I had grown all Cherokee Purples on this side, but that one was apparently a Mortgage Lifter. And so I went ahead, I took it over to the table on the patio, and I weighed it, and it is humongous. So without waiting any longer, let's go ahead and see how big this tomato really was. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and clip this first one off here, since it's going to be hard for me to get to that big one if I don't. I don't want to accidentally clip a whole cluster off here. And there we go. It'll be hard to get in there. There we go. There's that nice big one. As you can see, it was one of those really big mega blooms that I had going on here. So let's go ahead and we'll walk over to the scale here, and we'll see how much it weighs. So here we go. Time to weigh that big tomato I just picked. And as it turns out, this tomato is another Mortgage Lifter. It's one of the biggest ones I've had growing out in the Potager garden. So without waiting any longer, let's go ahead and see how much this monster weighs. This tomato came from one of those really large mega blooms. Alright, there we go. 1 pound, 12.4 ounce tomato. And this thing is a monster. This is officially one of the biggest tomatoes I have ever grown. And as you can see, tomatoes are still doing quite well. I have some Cherokee Purples and the Mortgage Lifters on here. I've since harvested a lot of Mortgage Lifter tomatoes. The biggest one I have ever grown, I picked last week. I think that was the last video I did of me picking the 1 pound, 12.5 ounce Mortgage Lifter. It's the biggest tomato I've ever grown. And so I can say the Mortgage Lifters are very productive. These here are the Cherokee Purples, and they did very well. Not quite as good as the Mortgage Lifters. They're not quite as prolific as the Mortgage Lifters are, but I still got some more Cherokee Purples coming on a lot of these plants here. And last week I picked at least 3 or 4 1-pound tomatoes off of the mega blooms that I had going on here at the bottom of the trellis. So the Cherokee Purple mega blooms turned out very good. Some of them I did pick off because they were looking a little too wonky, and they had some spots on them that were open that could lead them to disease. So I cut them off and left some of the better looking mega blooms on there. And I can show you a picture of those here in a second. I got at least 3 or 4 1-pound Cherokee Purples off of these plants, plus a lot of other smaller Cherokee Purples. There's some nice cluster Cherokee Purples that are growing. That looks like that's going to be a nice mega bloom tomato there. But as you can see, they've all overgrown the trellis, and I've had to snip them off at the top there to keep them from getting too high and falling over. Let's go around to the other side here and take a look. And you can see these Mortgage Lifters just still producing a lot of tomatoes. I've at least picked 20 or more tomatoes off these already, and they're still growing. Here's one very, very large mega Mortgage Lifter right here, and it even looked like it broke the branch. It got so heavy. So hopefully it'll turn out okay, but I'm going to leave it there to see how well it does. Some more large ones there, and a lot of new tomatoes forming at the top of the trellis here. So definitely a big performer, the Mortgage Lifter here.